Hey guys, this is part 2. If you didn't see part 1, I have the link to that in the description. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and roll the intro and get right into this.
Isaac Asimov, famous science fiction writer but also a professional biochemist, he said, it was the interaction of positive and negative energy that caused the universe to exist. That's one opinion. Here's another one, Stephen Hawking. He says it was the law of gravity that was the cause that brought the universe into existence. And Lawrence Krauss, who's a physicist who's probably the most active scientist working on this problem, how you could get a universe from nothing, he says that it's virtual particles that are the cause of the universe. And firstly, I want you to notice, see how none of them agree on what the beginning of the universe could have been? None of them agree. That's because there is no consensus from a scientific standpoint about what brought the universe into existence.
Well, you're not wrong. There is not a scientific consensus on what brought the universe as we know it to be as it is. Lawrence Krauss, by the way, has the multiple definitions of nothing that I talked about in the last video, so thank you for bringing him up here to point out how dishonest you've been. Also, on the note of Stephen Hawking, one of the things that he tried to do in his lifetime was try to unify the theory of relativity with quantum theory to create a theory of everything. Multiple people have tried to do this in the past, not just Stephen Hawking. And yes, none of them agree on this because they're all honest and they recognize that they don't know, but they all have their different hypotheses and have went about either explaining or testing them in their lifetimes. This is the honest approach that most scientists would take when it comes to the idea of the beginning of the universe. We simply don't know, so all we can do is hypothesize and test until we possibly come to a conclusion. We have mathematic formulas that get us close to t equals 0, but they don't quite tell us what happened in the instant where t equals 0 turned into time as we know it today. But again, that's just the thing. I don't know is the honest answer. I'm going to make an assumption that you're going to try to say that theism, specifically Christianity, claims that it knows the answer and most Christians are consistent with what the answer is, and that adds validity to your claim. Let's see if that's what you do.
But they all have another common problem. They all share this problem together, these explanations. None of them have the universe coming from actually nothing.
They don't have the universe coming from philosophical nothing, but they do have it coming from different versions of a scientific nothing. This is what happens when you conflate methodological naturalism with philosophical naturalism. Most of the scientists you name, when they're doing their experiments, are being methodological naturalists. This means that they're going to operate and run their experiments as if the material realm is all we have to work with. It says nothing about their personal beliefs on the matter, which is why they are not philosophical naturalists. Some of them might be, but do not conflate science, rooted in methodological naturalism, with philosophical naturalism, which is something very different. But you haven't got to the point where you say your worldview is superior yet, so let's continue until we get there.
Asimov has energy causing energy to exist. But how can energy exist before that first moment of time, which is when energy first begins to exist? Can you see the problem?
Sure, I think a lot of laymen do see a problem there, but when laymen see a problem in a scientific theory, it doesn't say anything about the validity of that theory. People who have no education on the subject matter that you're presenting, finding a problem in that subject matter means quite literally nothing. A concept you seem to be very familiar with.
Doesn't work. Stephen Hawking has gravity. But gravity only works if you already have matter for it to act on. Gravity is the force of attraction between two bodies with mass. You need matter for gravity to work. This doesn't work either. Krauss's example is really interesting. He says empty space is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles popping in and out of existence. If you wait long enough, that kind of nothing will always produce particles. But the problem is he's got space. Empty space is space. And if you wait long enough, it means you've got time. And if you've got space and time, then that kind of nothing is actually just something.
No, that type of nothing is not something. That type of nothing is a scientific definition of nothing. What you're doing right here is a category error. Also, you can wait forever, and if there's no change, then you don't have time, because time is simply a measurement of observed change. No change, no time. The minute you have something popping into existence in that type of nothing, you have a change, and therefore time. But do you see the problem here? As soon as you have something popping into existence, t equals 0 begins to count up. It did not magically negate t equals 0. Time still equaled 0 until that change occurred. You can't simply argue from incredulity and think that that means that your explanation holds water. So what, we have an argument for incredulity, we have equivocation. I wonder if we can play a drinking game with the amount of fallacies we can point out.
Naturalists always have to import features from something into their definition of nothing to be able to explain the origin of the universe. What we really need is a cause for the universe, for the beginning of the universe, that isn't reliant on time or space or matter or energy already existing. So how does Christianity go?
Usually by moving that goalpost just one step ahead. You'll argue that the first cause was a deity, and therefore t equals 0 can be anything you need it to be, and it will still comport to your definition of creation. I think. I don't know. You might surprise me.
Where would you look, by the way, if you wanted to find out about what Christianity has to say about the beginning of the universe? Oh goodness, you're all whispering. Of course it's Genesis 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
So because somebody wrote down in a book somewhere during the Iron Age that the world had a beginning, which is a very vague and easy to assert thing, suddenly your theology must be correct. Yeah, no, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
In the beginning, or at the first moment of time, God, the cause, created the heavens and the earth, the universe, time, space, matter, and energy. It begins to exist. So Genesis, which on naturalism is pre-scientific mythology, it nails the truth about the beginning of the universe 3,500 years before science finally arrives at the same conclusion, that the universe had a definite beginning at a moment in time.
At best, that means that the Bible got the beginning of the universe on accident. I mean, think about it. There's really only two options. Either the universe had a beginning, or it didn't. So it's a coin flip. It's a 50-50 chance. You're saying that because your Bible got something right that it had a 50-50 chance of getting, that means that the book itself must be true. That's not how this works. I can flip a coin right now and come to a correct conclusion concurrent with that coin flip. Does this mean that all truth stems from this coin? No, it means this coin was right on a 50-50 chance of being right.
Dr. Robert Jastrow, who at one time was the chairman of NASA's Lunar Exploration Committee, he said, "For the scientist who's lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He's scaled the mountain of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. Can you feel his disappointment?" Okay, and is that just a coincidence? Did the Bible just get it lucky?
Well, it was a 50-50 shot. Yes, the Bible did get pretty lucky on that. It might be correct by its own merits, but again, with a 50-50 shot, I'm fairly certain that you can hedge on it just being correct, not on its own merits. But that's not the real takeaway here. The real takeaway from that quote that you tried to give right there is the idea that a group of theologians would be scientifically ahead of an actual scientist. What we actually observe, however, is that the Bible itself seems to be scientifically behind current scientists. It claims that a great flood happened that didn't happen. It's been used to date the Earth to 6,000 years old, which it isn't. It has taxonomic claims that we can verify are false. I guess we could find the germ theory of disease in the Bible. No? Oh, that's right, because it's not a science book. That's fine, though. It's a holy book. It doesn't have to be a science book. It's when people try to dishonestly manhandle the thing into being scientific literature that you start to have problems.
Genesis also suggests a first cause that could produce that universe effect. It says, God created the universe.
And where is your evidence that it's your God specifically? Your book claimed a God, and if you claim that the book also says which God it is, now you're using circular logic. So how else would you determine which God it is? In the last video, I proposed that a universe being created by two gods warring, destroying a supernatural realm, creating the realm that we have here, and their war leading to the creation of the universe, is as justifiable as your position, and I think that holds true here. Your book says God created the universe, and my hypothesis did too. But we both share a similar problem. Neither of us can demonstrate which of these claims is actually true. We are both left, after these claims, empty-handed. I'm personally okay with there being a dead end, but you take it one step further and assert that you're not at one.
But I can hear an objection. I've never heard one in that form before, though. Objection by sneezing. Okay, and the objection is not a sneeze, it is that God is not nothing. How come you can have God as a pre-existing first cause of the universe, but you can't have pre-existing gravity or energies or virtual particles? And that's because natural explanations require part of nature to already exist in order to produce nature. What we need is an explanation outside of nature, something that transcends the physical universe. We need something supernatural. And if we think carefully about what God is like, we realize that he perfectly fits the profile that we're looking for. Firstly, we need a cause of the universe that's not made out of physical stuff, because that stuff only begins to exist at the first moment of time. And in John chapter 4, verse 24, Jesus says, God's spirit, he's spirit.
And this, again, is when you start using the Bible to try to purport scientific claims. What caused the universe is a scientific question. It possibly also is a philosophical and theological question as well, but ultimately, what caused our natural universe would fall under a methodological naturalistic approach. The problem, then, with proposing God usually ends up being one of two things. My aforementioned issue of not being able to discern which God caused it, that means that your God is begging the question. The second is that if you're going to propose that God is infinite and therefore was able to create the finite universe we find ourselves in, what's stopping anybody from asking what's the beginning cause of that God? Now, this is an argument that I've covered in my Worst Arguments Against God video. I'm not a personal fan of the who caused God argument. I think it's a bit nonsensical, but it is still no less a valid question that can be asked once you start making claims like the ones you've been making so far. The issue with God always ends up being the same. Whenever you propose God, you start begging more questions than you're actually answering.
He's not made out of atoms and molecules. He doesn't have a physical body. He's not a man in the sky with a long white beard. He exists wholly apart from physical materials. So we don't have the absurdity in our explanation of matter existing before matter exists. And because he's not made of anything physical, God doesn't take up any physical space or have a geographic location. He doesn't require space to already exist before space exists either.
That is mighty convenient. Not only are you then intellectually able to move this God so far out of the realm of verifiability so that you can discount anybody's questioning of this God to be nonsense, you've also managed to define God in such vacuous, loosey-goosey terms that there's almost not an argument here at all. Again, this is the previous issue of begging the question. You say that God is composed of spirit, so what is spirit? Your answer undoubtedly will end up being somewhere between I don't know and only God knows. Neither of those answers get us any closer to any type of truth, however.
And in physics, time is always linked to the existence of space. We've heard of the concept maybe of space-time. Well, God doesn't have any physical dimensions in space, so he doesn't have temporal coordinates that describe where he is in time. He exists independently of time. So we have an explanation of the beginning of the universe that isn't reliant on time or space or material or any other natural things in order to exist. So we haven't made any of the same mistakes that naturalists make.
Oh, you've made a lot of mistakes. Strawmanning your opponent's position is one of the biggest ones. You claim that naturalism saying these things is a mistake when I say that it's simply honesty. I'm comfortable that I don't know the beginning of the universe. My worldview doesn't bank on me knowing the beginning of the universe. But yours does seem to. If I found out tomorrow that God did in fact create the universe and it was literally any God at all, that wouldn't change me. At most, it would be one extra thing in the compendium of things that I do know, and I would be thankful for that. It would be one more question answered. But what would happen if somebody were to verify that it wasn't God, or even worse, that it was a different God that created the universe? My worldview has a slight paradigm shift. Your worldview crumbles. Which of these positions has mistakes?
God also is the kind of thing that would have the power to cause an effect. The power to create everything from nothing, that's maximal power. I can't actually imagine a greater demonstration of power than to craft each and every particle and atom and molecule completely from scratch out of nothing. Nothingness has no potential. It can't cause a universe to exist. But God's power has infinite potential, so he can.
So, in this instance, you actually don't have a universe from nothing. What you have is a universe from something. You have a universe from God. We know that matter can be converted into energy and vice versa, so at best what's happening here is you have a God who's using his power or energy to create a universe, or matter. That's not something from nothing. That's still something from something.
And the last thing is that God's spirit, that's something like an unembodied mind. He has infinite knowledge and therefore the capacity to design a universe. And because he's got a mind, he's got a will, he can choose to create a universe.
Not necessarily. If you have an all-good God who's the literal embodiment of all things that are good and can only do good, and that which is in his nature, which you would define as good, then this God actually doesn't have any free will. He's locked in a perpetual state of doing maximally good things and nothing else. He cannot do anything neutral, and he cannot do anything evil. He can only do good. These limiting factors aside, you still have the issue of a mind without a brain. We know that brains beget minds through the phenomenon of sentience and sapience, so your explanation for the mind of this God would be, well, vacuous. If I had to ask, whence cometh this mind, your answer would be nonsensical, because all ideas of what a mind are do not comport with what the mind of this God must be. That's not to say that this guarantees that this isn't the case. There could be a brainless mind. I'm not arguing that such a thing could not exist. What I am arguing, though, is that any explanation you give would be vacuous.
So when we think about what God is, we find out that he has exactly the properties that are consistent with a first cause of the universe. And the God explanation only becomes more and more likely as we investigate another feature of the universe that science has absolutely discovered, and that is that the universe is perfectly fine-tuned for life. We all know the story of Goldilocks, how she preferred porridge that was not too hot, not too cold, a bed that wasn't too hard or too soft. Well, we happen to find ourselves in a universe that's just right for life to exist, when on the basis of probability, it shouldn't actually be that way.
Yes, on the basis of probability, it's very unlikely that life would have arose in the universe in the way we find it today. But I have two problems with this. One, the probability of things that have already happened is 1. 2, the probability of you coming into existence had to comport with your parents getting together and the specific egg and specific sperm coming together to create you. This process had to be repeated throughout the generations all the way back to the point where man was not even an evolutionary concept. The probability of that happening was very unlikely. However, it did. Things having a low probability does not mean that they should not have happened. Also, our universe is not fine-tuned for life. Hell, our galaxy is not fine-tuned for life, and there's only a small percentage of our planet that hosts life, so it isn't even fine-tuned for life. This is the classic puddle in the hole scenario. The puddle that was made to comport with the hole it found itself in looks at the hole and says, wow, this hole was made specifically for me, when in fact it was the other way around. What we find all across the world is that life has to adapt to the environment it finds itself in. The environment does not adapt to hosting life. The very oxygen that you breathe is igniting in your system and killing you. That is not an environment fine-tuned for life.
I'm not going to go into any detail here, but there are 3 layers of this fine-tuning. There are heaps of examples of what we call local fine-tuning within our solar system. For example, one simple one, the Earth is the right distance from the sun so that we can have liquid water. Too far away and the water freezes over, we can't use it. Too close and it all boils away, we've got no usable water.
Yes, this is called the Goldilocks zone, and there's actually a lot of Goldilocks zone for us to use. We happen to be in the 25% margin of that zone. That means there's a lot more of our local group's Goldilocks zone that is usable than we actually find ourselves in. So what?
Tragic for life, wouldn't work. We've got what's called galactic fine-tuning, and that's where we find that our solar system happens to be in just about the best spot it possibly could be within our galaxy. It's away from the center's bad, there's black holes in there. They emit lots of radiation and they tear stars and things apart. We don't want to be there. But we're also close enough to the center where we get the heavy elements that whole process creates. And that's what planets are formed out of. We're close enough to get the good stuff of the planets, far enough away from the bad stuff to be able to survive.
Okay, so if there's only one planet out of this entire concoction that creates life, you, by definition, would have to find yourself on that planet if you're a living being. Again, the hole was not created for you, the puddle. You, the puddle, comported to the hole.
We're in a prime location within our galaxy to support life. But the most extreme examples of fine-tuning are found in the fundamental physics and the laws which govern the universe. I'm just going to give you one example of this, but there's lots. I want you to imagine that this dial controls the force strength of gravity everywhere it operates throughout the universe. And the thing is, there's only one setting on this whole dial that's going to allow a life-permitting universe to form. Any other setting you choose is going to completely rule out the possibility of there being living things in the universe. So be careful where you set it.
And again, no matter what the case may be, if you as a living being exist, then by definition you would have to fall within the points on this dial where that would be allowed. This is where I'd like to actually bring up an argument for you. When we're dealing with issues of fine-tuning, is it that God fine-tuned the universe for life, or was it that the universe couldn't be made any other way, and so this is the one he had to create life? In scenario A, the fine-tuning of the universe is completely arbitrary, and therefore nothing special. In scenario B, the fine-tuning of the universe was a limiting factor, thus stripping your God of omnipotence. So which is it? Because neither of them work in your favor.
And there's another problem. See these blue dots here around the outside? There's just a few more of them than what I was able to show in the picture. In fact, the number of dots around our imaginary gravity dial is so enormous that I struggle to comprehend the number. I can't make sense of it. And it's 10 to the power of 60. If you want to know what that is, that's 1 followed by 60 zeros, which looks like this if you wanted to know. And to give you some context, that number is somewhere between the total number of cells in a human body. It's more than that, but less than the estimated number of subatomic particles in the entire universe. And that's just gravity. That's how fine-tuned just one thing is. There are 30 or 40 other forces and ratios which also have to be set within an extremely narrow range, or the universe would be uninhabitable. How amazing is that? I couldn't even be bothered writing them all out. There's more. So if you want to explain that fine-tuning from a naturalistic perspective, you have to rely on probability. And there are two ways that naturalists do this. The first is that they just say that we got lucky. The universe is just fine-tuned by chance, and it's just coincidence that so many forces and quantities are all perfectly aligned at the same time. And the majority of scientists have discarded that explanation because it's too improbable to be a good explanation. When you factor in all of the finely tuned constants and ratios that there are, and you need to multiply them together to find the odds of the universe existing just as it does, you end up with the probability that's so tiny it becomes effectively zero.
No, you don't come up with a probability so tiny it's effectively zero. You come up with a probability very, very close to zero, but not effectively zero. If I were to propose another argument for you, let's assume that the singularity existed for infinity until change occurred, which we would know as the universal expansion or the Big Bang. This means there was literally infinite time for these constants to be adjusted until we find ourselves in the situation we are today. Given that before t equals 0, time becomes nonsense, you have, until this point, effectively infinite time to work with. So even something that's statistically improbable will inevitably happen. If I'm rolling dice or I'm trying to draw cards for a specific hand, and the chance of me rolling a particular roll or drawing those particular cards are incredibly low, given infinite time, having a relatively low chance of drawing the hand I need becomes no problem at all. Statistically low chances of things happening only become a problem when you're dealing with finite time. I only have roughly, 40 years left in my life? Maybe 50? So me doing something that has a 0.0000001% chance of working is a bit of a problem. I only have so much time to work with. But before time is a concept, this isn't necessarily a problem. Besides, this completely ignores another issue. If any of those dials were changed, if any of those numbers were different, then a completely different universe would exist. And if life arose in that universe, then you would say that that universe was finely tuned for that life. Again, this makes the entire fine-tuning problem completely arbitrary. You couldn't even argue the fine-tuning problem without life to argue about it. But it's okay. I get it. If you are a puddle, that hole does seem to conform to your shape quite well.
So some other scientists have tried to find ways to increase the probability of getting a universe like ours by chance. They say perhaps if there was billions and billions and billions of universes, then there'd be a higher chance that just one of them might randomly have the degree of fine-tuning that we see in our universe. So they've developed what's called the multiverse theory. Maybe there's this mother universe and pumps out all these baby universes, and they all have different features and properties to one another, and we're lucky because we just happen to live in the one that's fine-tuned for life. But there are a few problems with that explanation. Firstly, there's absolutely no evidence for it. It's just speculation. It's just a theory. And I don't even know how you'd go about finding evidence of a universe outside our universe, because I don't think we've got the tools to do that.
One, it's not a theory. Multiverses are not a theory. They have not graduated to theory. Theory is a level in science that is reserved for only things that are so well established that refuting them would require insurmountable odds and evidence. Also, if your issue with multiverses is that there's no evidence, then multiverses fall into the same category as your God does. There's no evidence for your God outside of arguments, and there's no evidence for multiverses outside of arguments. A good argument can be evidence of something, although I would consider it very bad evidence, and I would personally weigh the idea of multiverses and the idea of a god as equally probabilistic. I would also view all arguments for both in a similar light. So when you're trying to present this dichotomous coin to us between a god or a multiverse, you paradoxically find that both sides of the coin are heads. The coin is also a stone that you're throwing from a glass house.
Secondly, and this is pretty damning, the multiverse still needs to have a beginning. Scientists have figured this out. It has to have a beginning. So this theory is asking us not only to believe that our universe came into existence for no particular purpose, but that a universe generator that births all these other billions of universes also came into existence from nothing and for no particular purpose. It seems to multiply problems rather than solve them.
You're right, just like how your proposed deity begs the question, multiplying the problems as opposed to solving them.
And it also turns out that a mother universe would itself have to be finely tuned in order to be able to produce the variety of baby universes that would even give us the chance that just one might be able to be lived in. So naturalism fails to adequately explain how or why the fundamental properties of our universe are tuned so delicately for life. What does Christianity say? What's our message about this? Fine-tuning. We think that the best explanation for fine-tuning is that someone fine-tuned the universe, that God tuned the universe perfectly for life. Isaiah chapter 45 verse 18. He who created the heavens, he is God. He who fashioned and made the earth, he founded it. He did not create it to be empty. Paul Davies, who's a respected physicist who works at Arizona State University, he says, there is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. And then there's this from Fred Hoyle, an astrophysicist. A common sense interpretation of the fact suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces, like chance, worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question.
The problem here, again, is that you're taking quotes and trying to make them arguments for your side. This is like what happens when you have conspiracy theorists connecting all the dots from a bunch of barely tangentially related points to come to one massive conspiracy. One, the mere fact that you have physicists saying that they think there might be something behind it all doesn't necessarily point you in the direction of a god. It simply says that there's something behind all of the things we find in the universe. What that something is, the jury's still out on. Again, the honest answer is that you don't know. And specifically with your Fred Hoyle quote, the issue I would take with it is that it begins by saying a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests anything. Our common sense is, at best, only relatable to the surroundings we find ourselves in, and thus common sense is hardly common. If it's a common belief in an area that spirits lead to disease, then common sense would lead you to believe that when somebody is sick, they are being infested by a spirit. In the modern world, we know that that means that they have some type of disease that can be cured through medical science. So the issue here is that common sense itself is going to be completely subjective to the environment that that common sense was brought up in. This means that I don't particularly care for common sense approaches because common sense, again, is only ever going to be as useful as the environment that begot that sense.
The naturalist worldview says that there's no God, but it's unable to explain the beginning of the universe without him. And it can't account for the exquisitely balanced universe that we find ourselves in that appears to have been custom built for life. Christianity, on the other hand, says that there's a wise and powerful God. He's exactly the kind of thing that could have caused the universe. And the simple explanation for fine-tuning is that he designed the universe with life in mind.
And that is where the video ends. And we have all the same problems that I've been saying over and over again across these two videos. You have a person who's asserting that their worldview is more valid based only on the fact that they happen to have an explanation for something. This doesn't take into account how useful that explanation is, or if the explanation is even true. Again, if I might refer you to the point that some people used to think that spirits cause disease, and that was an explanation for disease. Now we know that germs cause many diseases, and as a result, we have another explanation for disease. Which one of these two explanations is true? Based on my interpretation of the logic that you used here, I can only assume that you would say that both of these are equally valid because they both have explanatory factors. Except I know that if I presented you with these two issues, you wouldn't say that. You would say that the germ theory of disease holds more weight because it doesn't beg as many questions as the spirits do. And yet, paradoxically, this argument wouldn't hold up if I was talking to you about the origin of the universe. And that's not even getting into the issues of literally every other god and religion having explanatory factors for the origin of the universe. So again, as I keep saying, at best we don't know, but I'm fine with that. Are you? But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. We're creeping up on 30 minutes long, so I think I may have overstayed my welcome a bit. But thank you all for everybody who's managed to stick it through to the end. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all tomorrow. As we move into the Patreon slides, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.